Hi, and welcome to another episode of Silver Goose Farm Stories. I'm your host, Mama Goose. I think I need to apologize for yet another delay in recording a podcast. Life has just been kind of crazy. I know I say that all the time, and so maybe that's just my normal, and I have to become more accustomed to ever increasing levels of craziness. But anyway, so for today's Homestead Headlines, we've got quite a bit of downtime to cover post-fire evacuation threat, which I believe was where we left off in this podcast series. So a couple weeks after the power came back, my gardens were starting to bounce back after having been off of water for a little while. But then our well went out. We woke up one morning and there was just no water. And usually that means there's a power outage, but the lights were working and our fans were still spinning. And so we called our local pump and well people, and they discovered that our well, after 20 years, had finally died. It was a wonderful summer discovery to find that we needed a new well pump. And we were also recommended to get a new pressure pump and also a water tank to help better facilitate our water system. I guess this would be a good place to talk about water systems when you're not part of city utilities. So our well provides water to our property and just our property. It's a private well. You can't really build in California without access to water, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody outside of California either, whether or not you get those building permits without water access. But anyway, our well pump draws water out of our well, and if you're lucky enough to have your well at a higher elevation than your house, then it can potentially feed to your indoor plumbing simply through gravity. You don't always have that luxury though, because you drill your well where there's water and you build your house where there's a space for the house to be built, and they're not always, at the ideal locations. Or in our case, they were already established when we bought our house. For our house, our well is at a lower point. So we have a pressure pump that kind of comes between the well and our house. And it draws water from that the well pump has brought up into a little holding tank that is pressurized, according to its name, and helps give us water to our house at the output that modern convenience has allowed us to become accustomed to. So not a dribble, but a nice, psh of water. Now, we've got a pretty small pressure tank because the previous homeowners were just one couple and they didn't really need as much of water output, I suppose. But we're a family of 7 with much higher water needs, not to mention our orchards, gardens, and animals. And so our pressure pump is pretty much always turning on and off as it moves water to where it's needed. Ideally, you'd have a large water tank put into the system where the well water could be stored and fed into the house so that you limit the constant start-ups and offs of either of the pumps in your system. So back to the original problem. When the pump people told us of our situation, we agreed that all the individual parts that they were talking about were necessary, but we only had just barely the funds for that immediate well pump fix. Normally, if you ask us what's the limiting factor in the projects around the farm between, let's say, time, skill, and money, it's usually time that is the limiting factor. But the last few projects and farm emergencies that we've come across have really pushed money into the forefront of of that race, I suppose. I'm thankful to have our water turned back on again, and we are definitely blessed to have to not be too financially strained right now. Like we're not we're not able to make any big purchases, but we are able to do our day-to-day pretty comfortably still. But anyway, so we're saving up for those last two pieces of our water puzzle because we wouldn't want our new well pump to die because our current pressure systems didn't work. Pressure pump system didn't work, and our water tank is non-existent. Anyway, so we got water back on, but pretty soon after that well pump got fixed, we had to turn the water right back off again because we discovered that we now are facing some issues with our septic tank, and those are always fun for everyone. So I guess more country utility info for anyone who isn't unfamiliar. If you are not tied to city sewage management, we've got something called a septic tank buried in the ground near our home. All the drain pipes of our indoor plumbing feed into this tank. So that's sinks, tubs, laundries, toilets, dishwashers, whatever drains out goes into that tank. The septic is connected to lines of perforated tubing in a sediment field underground that lead away from it, where water from the tank drains out and eventually evaporates. So the slow process and the passage between that sediment field and the soil above it, because it's buried, kind of filters out the water, similar to what happens in like the municipal water filtration systems too, but sort of going up instead of down. But anyway, that prevents a cesspool of sewage water basically from forming in your yard, and it's just a very slow, steady evaporation process. That is the reason why sometimes if you have a septic tank, you'll notice there's like a spot in your yard that is always greener than the rest of your yard, especially if you don't do any particular type of like sprinkler irrigation system for grass. That isn't necessarily the case at our house because our summers are so dry that nothing lives and grows anywhere unless we're intentionally watering it. What gets left behind in the tank after that water drains out in the leach fields and evaporates are your solids. And those eventually get broken down by the bacteria that's present in the actual septic tank. Sometimes you have to get your septic tank pumped if it fills up too quickly with solids. That's usually every, people estimate 2 to 7 years depending on how well you maintain your septic. But there are also people who have lived in their house for many more years than that and have never had their septic pumped because they have like a healthy relationship with the bacterial cultures that are growing there. It's kind of a cool process actually. But back to our current issue. In our case, something appeared to be blocking the drains to the actual septic tank itself. So between our house and the septic tank, something was in the way. And then we also discovered that our septic tank, even if the water was eventually getting through, it wasn't draining that gray water is what it's called, that's sewage water, fast enough. So you can tell when you've got issues with your septic tank because you will flush your toilet, and instead of hearing that nice like swish whoosh and drain of water, it'll be kind of like a really less forceful drain, and sometimes you'll hear like a glug glug as a backfill kind of sound as the water doesn't just quite successfully get out of the way. If you're even more lucky, you'll see water coming back up from the drains, like in your showers or tubs, and that is very gross. If you have access points outside of the house, that you'll notice there are these little like screw tops that are in the drains that lead out of your house that you can open and check for exactly these things like roots or blockages. Sometimes you can see outflow from there. And then the most fun of all is when the actual septic cover in your yard is like popped up and floating. This is so gross. And overflowing into the surrounding ground. It's an absolute carnival of fun. So we had that happening. It actually wasn't backing up into the house. It was just surprised or disturbingly like weak at all of the sink and outlet drainage points. So we hadn't got to the point where we had this enormous unsanitary mess, but we just knew that something wasn't moving well. On that particular day, like, so we had all of these access points open while we were trying to find out what was going on, and it's not the best smell because of what it is, obviously, but on top of that, our dogs decided that they had chased down a skunk, trapped it in my fence garden, and they were just on all sides just barking their heads off trying to get at it. And of course the skunk was doing what skunks do and was just spraying our dogs with as much of its wonderful spray as it possibly could. So it was quite perfumed outside from both problems. And, it wasn't exactly the most visitor-friendly place for a few days. Definitely was not enjoying that fresh country air that week. Anyway, we did eventually get past those hurdles. It was another expensive visit from a professional because my husband and my father-in-law basically did all they could do with the tools we had at home, and we just had to call in the big guns. I am thankful we did that because they were successful in breaking through the blockage, and the blockage was way more significant. It was almost too much for the professionals themselves. I have no idea what it was. I still don't know. I think one person said that that's just how it happens when you have grease build up over time. But we don't pour grease down our sink. And so it must have just been blockage from a very long amount of time or something that had caused it. We're still not sure what it is. You think you can pay to have a camera that's snaked down your drains to see exactly what it is? But I don't particularly want to be able to see it. So I'm happy with where we are at with the current septic situation. So we had the water shut off for a little bit during that time so that there wasn't any added issues like flowing into the septic tank or the leach lines because our gardens are kind of all around our yard and the water can drain in that direction because that's what a leach field is. It's for drainage. So we had the water turned off to keep any additional water away. And so my garden was really struggling at this point. When we turned the water back on, we did discover that there was just a lot of issues going on with our current irrigation system. This is because well water isn't purified city water or that treated city water. There's a lot of minerals in our well water. I mean, it's perfectly healthy and safe to eat or to drink, to use for, your daily water usages. It's just a harder water because of its natural pumped source, and that does build up in your irrigation systems. We have little filters on all of our sprinkler systems, and we have to go through and clean them out every now and then so that everything works smoothly. But also starting and stopping water also has a build-up effect too. It just kind of flushes everything out that has kind of built up in an unexpected way. And we had blocked sprinkler heads or sprinkler heads that just popped off from built up pressure, and water was just not being put where it was supposed to go. So my husband kind of made the executive decision to go ahead and just turn off all of the irrigation. We're kind of at the point going into late summer and early fall where we're past all of the main crops that we grow. Our fruit trees are done producing, at least for now, and that's a whole nother story that I could talk about. And so we're kind of transitioning from summer into winter, and it's not terribly devastating. It's just a little bit disappointing that I always have high hopes that every year we're just going to progress and get better in the garden. And this year was kind of a step backwards in productivity and success, I guess, in terms of harvest. But we did learn a lot in the process, and we have big plans and know what kind of changes we're going to make this year to avoid, or know what we're going to do next year to avoid this year's problems. Now, that's no guarantee that next year won't provide its own set of unique and exciting difficulties, but only time will tell. In other farm news, one of our sows had another litter of piglets. I believe she had 11. There were a couple that were very weak and didn't make it, so we're down to about 7 or 8, I think. But these ones are looking real strong. They are not enjoying staying in a pen, and because in the summer our electric fence is not quite as effective. Also, these piglets are really small still, so they just fit right under that last fence line and doesn't even touch them really. And so even if it was a hot wire, it wouldn't be effective if they don't make contact with it, obviously. So they've been exploring. It's like the oak trees are dropping their acorns right now, so they're really loving rooting around at the base of trees and eating up all the acorns and really, making themselves more delicious, I suppose. But they're not staying in their pen anymore, which will be troublesome as they get bigger, I am going to admit. Our pigs are pasture pigs, but which means they don't root around as in such a destructive way as like the bigger grain-fed breeds do. But they still do wander, and if they find a nice soft soil spot, they will just bury their nose in it and overturn it and find all sorts of yummy goodies for themselves. So in the very near future, we're going to be transferring the little piglets to a more secure pen of hog panel. Our sows don't go out even if the fence is not on. They're so used to it and they enjoy where they are. And I really like that they also enjoy their space. So it's just the little ones that are just rambunctious at this point. We have gotten past the scorching hot days of summer, finally. I think it was just, at one point it was just a full-on month and a half of days over 100 degrees. And we got to a day that was just 92, I think, after a certain stretch. And my little one was walking around the house in a big old jacket because she was complaining that it was too cold. I kind of looked at her like she was crazy, but I did have to admit that it felt significantly cooler and I was able to spend a little bit of time outside in a way that I hadn't the week prior because it was scorchingly hot. I guess I've become accustomed to the summer to some degree, which is a horrifying statement for me to make, but yeah, even though it was very, very hot, I wasn't a weird cave gremlin this summer. Well, that's interesting. We'll mark that up to personal development and leave it at that. I did end up giving my husband heat exhaustion, though, because of my sudden, I guess, comfortability with extreme heat. Because he was outside helping me with a garden project. I just needed kind of extra shoulders and manpower. Digging out on my garden beds and pulling out all of the Bermuda grass by its roots and laying down plastic mulch under them in a double layer because I refuse to be beaten out by a grass. So that was a big project. It's still ongoing. We've got over half of them completed at this point, but there's a few left. Anyway, so I gave him heat exhaustion because he was out in the sun helping me dig, and that was a couple of days of recovery, at least from the main down portion of it, but he still does get fatigued if it's a little bit warm and he's not right on top of his hydration and electrolytes, and I'm really making it my personal duty to make sure he stays hydrated. It's super important to do that for yourself, especially when you're exerting yourself physically in a hot situation, but really any temperature. Heat exhaustion is no joke, and heat stroke most definitely not. It can be incredibly dangerous. So yes, PSA, please drink your water and stay on top of your salts. And lastly, our neighborhood co-op has started up again, and my kids are loving seeing their friends more consistently and getting taught by their favorite teachers and not having to look at my face every single day in order to do their teaching. I'm also teaching class and a half, kind of, and it's been a nice change too. It's a different pace than our regular farm things, which is nice, and I get to sort of exercise my brain in a different way. My oldest is grumbling now, though, because obviously as they get older, their workload is also getting bigger. I keep telling them that it's not anything compared to the hours spent or they would have spent if they were in a more traditional like public school setting, and they should be really grateful for the flexibility that they have as homeschoolers. But as always, I wonder how much of what I say actually goes into their heads. My husband at least says he enjoys my homilies, so I have one fan. Looking forward to the fall. I am, and all that it will bring. Once the cool weather hits, I can really get out there and do impactful work on the farm, help my husband with whatever animal projects he's got, and just really be more physically involved with things here. And there's always stuff to do. It's a never-ending list, but I'm really looking forward to that. I'd love to hear what you are looking forward to in the fall. I know it's a popular season for most people. So, yeah, if you'd like to drop a line and tell me what your favorite fall activity is, I'd love to hear it. You can do that by visiting our website at silvergoosefamilyfarm.com, or you can reach out to us at our Instagram, same handle, Silver Goose Family Farm. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I always look forward to hearing from everybody and being able to share stories from our end as well. Hope to talk with you soon. Thanks. Bye.